Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on The Story Within, we retell those moments honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. The Fork and China chorus was halfway through its polite little song when Lila stood up at the far end of my dining table and quieted the room without asking. The ceiling fan whirred. Ice slid in a sweating glass. We wore a Savannah Sunday shirts, tucked pearls out. Manners layered like the biscuits in the basket. Lila didn't bother with manners. She held a card between two fingers, the way a girl holds a cigarette in an old movie, casual, cruel, a performance just for the lens in her head. "Mom," she said, voice crisp enough to slice, "consider this a wake-up call." Then she bent the plastic hard until it snapped. The sound was small and indecent. It echoed anyway. My cousin stopped sawing through a pork chop. Aunt Netta studied her napkin as if scripture had been printed on the hem. From the sunroom, the neighbors' wind chimes threw a bright tinkle into the hush like an inappropriate laugh. Lila set the two halves on the linen runner as neatly as you might place a pair of cufflinks. "I'm done underwriting your habits," she added. The smile she gave me was gentle and public, the kind that photographs well. I set my palm on the table to steady the glassware. "Message received," I said. The words came out dry, already aired by the fan. She waited for more tears, pleading any little theater. When none arrived, she lifted her shoulders, a shrug wrapped in silk, and sat. Someone at the middle of the table asked too brightly if anyone wanted more squash casserole. No one did. I gathered my napkin, slid back my chair, and reached for the broken card. It was still warm from her hand. The edges pressed into my skin with a mean kind of intimacy. I put both pieces in my pocket, said, "Excuse me," and stepped away from the table, from the humidity of sympathy, from the soft, punishing quiet. The staircase creaked the way it always had in this Ardsley Park house, old pine telling the truth under a careful coat of varnish. Spanish moss swayed beyond the landing window, gray-green and theatrical against a blue so clean it felt rehearsed. In the hall, the smell of lemon oil and last night's coffee met halfway and made a tired kind of peace. My study has a door that closes like a decision. I did that first close turn, the brass let the latch, say what I wouldn't. Afternoon light laid its hands on the desk. Dust drifted in its own ceremony. I took out a small tin from the sideboard, dented with a scallop stamped on the lid, the kind of souvenir you buy at a gas station on the way to the islands and keep for no reason for 20 years. The tin used to hold buttons. Now it held whatever I told it to. I placed the two halves of the card on the blotter first. Side by side, they glittered in a stubborn way, gold numbers catching like fish scales. The more you looked, the cheaper it seemed. I set the tin next to them, and for a long breath didn't move. A mockingbird worked through someone else's song on the oak outside. From below, a drawer slid open closed. Someone whispered Lila's name as if it were a prayer or a warning. In this house, it had been both. The air carried butter and rosemary and the discipline of silver that had been polished by the same hands for 3 generations. I have those hands. They don't shake. When I finally reached forward, my fingers left ovals in the thin dust, 2 clean moons on the desk. I picked up each piece and turned them over front back as though they might offer a better angle if I behaved. The jagged edges bit. I liked the sting. It meant I could feel what I chose to touch. I opened the tin. Inside lay the plain things that live with you so long they become invisible, a sewing needle threaded and knotted months ago, a mother-of-pearl button that didn't match anything anymore, a penny ruined by the laundry and shining from it anyway. I slid the halves between the button and the penny. They fit. I set the tin on the shelf above the desk, where the light couldn't brag on it. A small silhouette among thrift store paperweights and a stone my daughter once handed me on Tybee, back when a gift was a thing you found, not a thing you flaunted. Downstairs, a chair leg scraped. Another fork surrendered to gravity and clinked. I could picture the table from here without trying, the pitcher sweating into its own saucer, the condensation making a dark ring I would wipe later, the casserole spoon resting at the exact angle a spoon rests when a family has decided not to eat anymore, the runner my sister swore was cream but I knew was wedding dress and said nothing about. I stood at the window until the glass cooled my forehead and left a soft oval there, a second mark to match the one on my palm. Then I went back to the desk, righted a frame that had dared lean, and straightened a stack of bills that had been straight to begin with. When the room looked like someone responsible lived in it, I sat. The tin watched me without eyes. I let my hand rest on the desk where the dust had been and felt the wood press back. The house has a way of answering if you touch it long enough. In the hallway, the floor complained again, 1 step, then 2, followed by the front door opening, letting in a thin rope of heat and the wet whisper of mid-afternoon. A pause, and the door clicked shut. The fan downstairs kept humming like a faithful old song. Someone cleared a throat. Someone poured tea. Conversation found its way back in narrow strands, careful and harmless. I stayed where I was with the hinge sound still in my ear and the light moving across the blotter half an inch at a time, making the dust earn its keep. The card halves were no longer on the desk. The room was quieter for it. A minute later, the mockingbird started over, a different song, same bird. The mockingbird kept cycling through borrowed melodies until it struck one that matched the room. I let the sound settle and opened the lower drawer, the one that stuck a heartbeat before it gave way, the one I had waxed along the rails with a stub of candle 10 summers ago. Paper breathed out. Even paper has a climate in this house. On top lay a manila folder the color of weak tea. I had written a name on the tab years back and then traced over it with a heavier pen until the ink went glossy with insistence, Cypress Reach. The handwriting is mine from 2 lives ago, the nurse's loop, the noon hour hurry. I set the folder on the blotter where the light could catch the edges without bragging. There are places a family learns to ignore because they never dressed up enough to be seen. Cypress Reach is one of those thick, water-black mud that won't let go egrets pale as old linen a mile of shore where oyster shells have been turning themselves into chalk since before any Caldwell knew the sound of our name. My grandfather kept a map rolled in a cardboard tube behind the broom in his shed tracks, marked in pencil a compass. Rose, a schoolchild, might have drawn one corner singed from a cigarette he swore he never lit. When he died, the map found its way to me. Nobody argued. Nobody blessed it either. They had city appetites by then. I opened the folder. The first thing on top was a photocopy of that map, the paper bent where the tube had taught it to curl. Below it, deeds stamped with the county seal signatures in the tidy slant of notaries who will never be famous for anything receipts for taxes paid, in years when I had to count tips to make exact change. I slid a thumb under a deed and felt the grit the copier had caught and preserved like a flaw in a tooth. The sheet smelled faintly of the church basement paper drives that raised money when I was 12, ink and dust and starch. Knights have a way of filing themselves if you don't. In mine, the NICU stood in steady order monitors and metronomes, the small hands of new people coached into staying. The first winter I worked there, the radiator in my apartment clanked like it was learning English and failing. I learned to count hours by the taste of coffee. You can tell midnight from 3 a.m. with your tongue if you stay awake long enough. On the mornings when my bicycle chain refused to behave and my legs were a set of good intentions, I'd lock it to the service entrance and jog across the asphalt with my scrubs flapping and salt drying along the hem where the alley puddles had tried to baptize me. The city slept stupid and sweet. We didn't. In the pause between discharge summaries and dawn, I sometimes wrote lists in the break room, rent-car insurance shoes for a child whose feet grew like intentions grow quietly, then all at once. On those same lists, I'd draw small boxes next to big words I didn't say aloud. Savings, taxes, land. The boxes stayed empty most months. On the months when they didn't, the pen made a sound like a tide moving across pebbles. Under the deeds lay a folded letter, the creases gone white at the folds. Memorial Health University Medical Center across the top. The letter thanked me for volunteering to cover the holiday shift and included a coupon for the cafeteria as if soup at 3 a.m. could be a present. I kept it because the signature belonged to the unit manager who once stood beside me at an incubator and told me without blinking that I had steady hands. That was the first time anyone had used those exact words on me. Steady is a kind of currency. Beneath the letter, a contract from a not very handsome building on Bull Street that used to be a print and copy shop and then became a tutoring center when the owner's cousin discovered education could be sold by the hour without anyone calling it a debt. I took shifts there in the evenings, the fluorescent buzz making commas in my hearing. A girl named Evie came in every Tuesday with a book she had no business being assigned and a face that accused you of underestimating her. I taught her how to carve a thesis like you clean a fish, one line, all the meat, no bones left to choke on. When she graduated, she brought me a bouquet of pencils tied with kitchen string because her mother said flowers go to waste. I still have one pencil from that bundle. It sits lead down in a jam jar by the window, stubborn and common the way useful things are. The bills from that year are rubber banded. The band has broken and been tied back into a knot a human hair could envy. I flipped the stack and found the receipt that mattered more than rent ever did. Baldwin Park title earnest money received. The number is not large now, but then it had weight you could feel in your knees. Lila was 23 and had a taste for light fixtures that looked like they knew they were expensive. She did not have a deposit. I sold Lot 7 at Cypress Reach. I took the check to the title office and did not tell anyone I could hear my grandfather's shed door swing open and bump its frame. The map in my folder lost a corner of its pencil that day. The page did not bleed. In the back pocket of the folder sat a spreadsheet printed on 2 sheets because I refused to learn how to make it fit. The columns were labeled in a language I learned by ear, the way people learn to sing in church without reading music. Harbor Span Logistics Seed Round, Palmetto Crane Systems Note Converted, Savannah Intermodal Partners LP Distribution. Those names won't ring any bells in a house that grazes its own lawn and calls it golf. But over by the river, where cranes bow all day long and containers stack like cities, they count as a vocabulary. I went to a fundraiser once at a museum where a board member with a side part and a charity tie asked me how a nurse came by words like intermodal. Same way a crane learns to lift what's heavier than it is, I said. Practice. He laughed like I told him something gentler. The first time I sat at a long conference table under a photograph of ships dwarfed by their own metal skins, I felt plain in a way that was not insult. The men said tonnage and throughput and pressed the ballpoint tips of pens into legal pads until dots appeared where ideas did not. I watched the woman who ran the numbers pick lint off her sweater with one precise pinch and knew I could trust an outfit that hired a person with her exact attention. I put in what I could afford to miss and then forgot it on purpose, like money I might find again in the pocket of a coat when winter came around. I brushed my thumb along the edge of the spreadsheet until the curve of paper warmed. The room held the smell of lemon oil and the faint copper of a summer storm rehearsing out past the marsh. The mockingbird shifted keys. I set the spreadsheets aside and slid out a smaller envelope, thin stamped by a bank whose signage had been redesigned 3 times since the day this was printed. The flap lifted with that shy hiss paper makes when it thinks no one is listening. Inside lay a single page with a title that was both plain and ridiculous: Account Authority, Single Action Directive. I hadn't named it that. Lawyers like to dress decisions and call it modesty. I had signed where the arrows told me to sign. 10 years ago, in a room that served cheap coffee and a view of a live oak whose branches rested on their own shadows. Marcus Lang had explained the shape of it without leaning forward, without lowering his voice. Without the paternal awe some men keep in their pockets for women who show up with their own pens. In the unlikely event you feel your authority is threatened or diluted, he said you can enact a single action directive with a dated instruction. It requires no second signature if we've verified identity and if the directive remains on file. He set a slim folder in front of me and a fountain pen I didn't use because I don't trust instruments that can blot. Is that normal? I asked. It is prudent, he said, and looked at the oak as if to say, trees don't ask permission to hold their own leaves. He slid a sheet across the desk with boxes that wanted checking and lines that wanted names spelled right. I filled them. I signed like a person who understands that the steadiness of a hand is not the same thing as the invitation. Now that page sat in my study as untroubled as a hymn sung in the middle of the week. I traced the margin where a staple had once been and felt the slight bruise in the fiber. The directive did not owe me anything. It existed the way a spare key exists in the calm hope you never have to turn it. I closed the smaller envelope and leaned back until the chair took the shape of me. Through the window, a thin seam of sky had gone the color of pewter, and the leaves on the live oak turned their paler sides forward, as if the tree had thought to introduce us to the undersides we always ignore. The house exhaled with the weather. Downstairs, a plate touched the sink with the carefulness of someone doing something useful to avoid saying anything silly. I tucked the directive behind the deeds where it had lived all this time, and set the Baldwin Park receipt on top as if to remind the present which past it belonged to. In the spine of the folder, a small object knocked when I moved it, a metal click. I shook the folder lightly and outslid a key on a brass ring with a tag stamped shed. The tag is not from our shed. We never stamped anything in our shed. This one came from my grandfather's pocket the day my grandmother made him empty every bit of it onto the kitchen counter because she was tired of washing unknown weight in his trousers. The key matched a padlock that had rusted to a polite refusal before the padlock finally died of its own effort. I kept the key because it looked like responsibility. I set the key on the desk and let it taste the air. You can tell what's coming by how metal feels against your palm, or you can't. Some things are just cold until they warm. From the hall a floorboard gave. A pair of voices low threaded themselves into one and drifted away. I reached for the last item in the folder, a photograph the print shop clerk had offered to enlarge for $1 extra if I wanted impact. I had declined. The photo was the size of a postcard and showed Lila at 8, standing on the lip of the river at Tybee, her knees muddy, her hair acting like it had made its own weather. She grinned at me with all the impossible teeth of a child who believes the ocean can be folded and put in a pocket if her mother says so. She held a shell like a trophy. I had written on the back in pencil that day, June. She asked if the river ever stops. I said only long enough to change its mind. I slid the photo back and closed the folder before the room decided it had more to say about it than I could use. I smoothed the tab with the heel of my hand and returned the folder to the drawer. Paper makes a sound like agreement when it meets more paper. I let the drawer go almost shut, and then changed my mind and opened it again to add the key. It lay sideways, catching the last of the light. Something in my chest loosened the way a button does when the thread finally gives up after doing exactly the job it was hired to do. In the sideboard, the tin with the scallop waited where I had left it on the shelf. I didn't touch it. Not everything needs an audience. On the desk, a single mote of dust spun on a column of warm air, and then went still as if it had chosen work after all. When I stood, my knees told the truth about the years. My hands were the same hands that had carried babies no bigger than a word from incubator to mother and placed them there without tremble. My hands were the same hands that counted pills and pennies and school forms, and hours until hours made a kind of city you can live in without losing your way. I turned off the lamp and let the study go dim in stages: window first, desk last. The mockingbird found silence and kept it. At the landing, the house met me with the particular breath a home takes when people are speaking softly and plates are being stacked one on another towards you clean. I went down into the faint steam of dishwater and the citrus of a cut lemon and the small civility of a towel folded on a chair, back, because someone had meant to be careful and managed it. The conversation at the table had found its way back to weather and church and a cousin's boy who had taken up rowing on a river that likes to argue. Lila's name did not appear. Sometimes the most honest thing a family does is choose its omissions. I rinsed a glass at the sink, the water ran cold, and then considered the idea of warmth for a while before adopting it. Outside, thunder practiced on the far side of the marsh. The afternoon arranged itself around the sound. When I set the glass upside down on the rack, the ring it left on the mat looked like an answer someone would need later. I left it there. I wiped the counter where a line of sugar had laid itself down, and with the heel of my palm pressed crumbs into the center of my hand until they disappeared. The house clicked and settled. Pine does that in summer. I stood a moment longer with my back to the room, the window framing a strip of sky that had decided on pewter and was sticking to it. Someone asked me if I wanted dessert. Not now, I said, and dried my hands on a towel that had been a Christmas present when Lila was still young enough to wear her hair in two parts and call it a choice. The day made its quiet turn. The table took back its shine. Plates found their stacks. Voices thinned and threaded apart. When the front door breathed open to let the afternoon out, I could feel the house lift a fraction on its joists, as if it too had stood for a while, and then decided sitting was the better posture. The door clicked shut with manners. The fan kept its low hymn. I went back to the stairs, the steady creak under each foot, a register of place and time, and reached the study again because some rooms earn 2 visits in the same day. On the desk, a single page from the folder had been left out without my meaning to do so. County tax receipt, Cypress Reach. Paid in quarters once dollars, another time a cashier's check later. The dates made a line that looked like a path a person could walk. I slid the page into its proper order and pressed the folder flat. Outside, the first drop of rain hit the sill and made a sound like a faint knock. I answered it by opening the window an inch. The room took the weather in and tucked it around itself like a blanket without asking anyone for permission. On the street, tires hissed. Somewhere in the block, a dog made its case and then, receiving no argument, relented. The drawers closed without complaint, the lamp stayed off, the tin with the scallop waited. The key slept. The map in the folder held its pencil lines. The house, satisfied with its inventory, kept breathing. Rain arrived the way polite guests do in this town, announced by a single knock, and then present everywhere at once. The window took a soft breath, and the air shifted from lemon oil to wet pavement. I let the room drink a little, then latched the sash before the paper on my desk could curl into a pinion. The tin with the scallop kept its counsel on the shelf. The house settled like a cat that had decided on one lap. Evening made itself small on purpose. Dishes dried in their racks. A cousin's car reversed down the drive with exaggerated care taillights doing a small theater in the wet. Silence came back shyly and then stayed. I rinsed my hands, turned the towel by its edge so the seam wouldn't find the floor, and returned to the study where the drawer that knows my name gave itself up exactly the way it always has. The single action directive lay in its envelope like a thing that could not be hurried and did not need to be invited twice. There are sentences the body recognizes before the brain drafts them. My hands knew the keyboard before my thoughts got around to verbs. The cursor wavered, then stood still. I addressed the message to Marcus Lang and did not dress it up. Some tasks wear their own tie. Marcus, I wrote, please enact the directive on file, revoke all secondary user access, consolidate household accounts to the contingency structure. Freeze any cards, virtual or physical, bearing the name Lila Caldwell Mercer or any derivative thereof. Confirm when complete. R. Caldwell. I read it once for cowardice and found none. I read it once for pettiness and removed a word that wanted to preen. I attached a scan of my driver's license and the original directive for the sake of tidy men who file tidy things. The send button made its small sound not a click exactly, more the sigh of a hinge when it remembers it was greased last week. The room did not change shape. The rain considered another verse and offered it. I answered the dishwater, the light. The particular business of shutting a house down for the night. The lamps in rooms no one sat, in the front latch checked, the back door leaned into until it confessed, the quilt turned down with the old fold that remembers other hands. Sleep came without bargaining. The world stayed where I had left it. Morning brought the ordinary, the neighbor's screen door, a radio 2 houses over, testing a preacher's voice against static coffee, asserting itself through the filter like a confident man who's already in the room. I used the blue cup with the hairline crack you can't feel and won't see until the day it becomes truth. Steam wrote and erased its own words on the kitchen window. The rain had gone and left everything brighter than it knew what to do with. The phone chimed once on the counter. From Marcus Lang, directive enacted at 06:17, secondary users removed, cards terminated, accounts consolidated per instructions, will follow up with formal notice. I drank. The coffee was strong and unfair and exactly right. Out on Victory Drive, traffic learned its day. I washed the cup and set it down upside down to mind itself. The house held still. No story needs witnesses to be real, but some days oblige them anyway. I didn't go to the store. Floodlights of errand and display belong to other kinds of mornings. I took the walk I always take when the river angle suggests it, 1 block to the left, 2 down across to Habersham, where porches practice their manners, then back past the school where chalk dust hangs in air you can't see. Cicadas tuned their instruments for a heat that hadn't arrived. The city smelled of cut grass and the nagging promise of honeysuckle. By 10, the phone began its second career. A text from a niece who appears only when hearts or fireworks are in season. "You okay?" I sent a picture of the oak in my yard holding its own sky and said, "Fine." She liked the photo and then left it alone the way a person ought to when they get the answer they actually asked. At 10:42, Lila's name claimed the screen. I let it ring once, twice. I answered on the third because we are the sum of our customs. Her voice arrived hot from movement, breath loud enough to fog glass. "What did you do?" She bypassed greeting like a toll booth she believed did not apply to her. "I'm at Whole Foods. This is embarrassing." Noise populated the background, the polite beeps of a machine pretending neutrality. The shoe squeak of aisles kept too clean to trust. Someone coughed, a man's throat clearing itself into importance. Lila lowered her voice in a way that traveled farther. "They keep saying the card is declined." She stressed the last word like it could be negotiated into a compliment. "Run it again," she told someone not on my line, and then to me, "I don't have time for your situations." "I don't have situations," I said. "I have accounts." A beat. I might have heard a receipt printer considering its paper. "I have," she started, then changed keys. "I have groceries on the belt. People are watching." "Then they know you eat," I said. "This isn't funny." I didn't make a joke. Silence found the distance between two people who know where the other keeps the matches. The clerk's voice came in small and dutiful. "I'm sorry, ma'am, it's still not going through." Lila's tone split. One half faced the clerk's sugar in a hardened pan. "Can you call your manager?" The other half turned at me and sharpened. "Fix it." "Call the bank," I said. "Ask for Mr. Lang." "Who?" The syllable dragged a pearl across tile. "Marcus. He'll explain." I let the breath do the rest. "You are not the account holder." For a moment, grief walked the wire between us and heels. Then the wire snapped. "You're unbelievable." A chair scraped somewhere near her. "Apple Pay will work," she announced to someone else, with the confidence people reserve for elevators and lies. The phone jostled. A new beep, a pause, another apologetic clerk voice, and then the word that doesn't change its clothes for anybody, declined. Her breath picked a fight with the line. "Are you proud of yourself?" My feelings didn't sign the paperwork. "You can't do this to me." "I didn't do anything to you," I said. "I did something for myself." She said my name the way you slap a hand. The connection went thin and then broke. The call screen fell quiet. My kitchen returned. There are houses that echo. Mine keeps the sound close as if it knows you might need to hear it again later and not admit it. I stood still long enough to learn the smell the sun makes when it hits a cutting board. The phone didn't move. A fly revisited a spot on the glass and failed to fall in love. Outside, a truck's backup beeper practiced regret. At 11:07, the phone came alive again this time, with a number that belonged to a switchboard and a calm voice trained to ride weather. "Mrs. Caldwell." "This is Southern First Private. Mr. Lang asked that I confirm the directive execution and answer any immediate questions." "Thank you," I said. "There may be a call to you from a secondary user we won't discuss." "You won't," I agreed. A brief quiet measured our manners. "If you'd like written confirmation, I would. It's on its way." We exchanged the nothing that makes structure look like kindness. I ended the call and let the kitchen find me where I had left it. The clock did its small work. The day advanced the width of a spoon. By noon, the story had put on shoes and left the house. Stories do that, especially in a place that values porches and shade and the exact angle of a neighbor's blind. I didn't need to see the miles it walked. A cousin's friend texted a screenshot of a group chat I do not consent to belong to. At Whole Foods, Ruth's card drama, another no Lila's. A third awkward. The last message from a woman whose entire career is knowing when pity will photograph well read. She looked flushed. I set the phone screen down and washed an apple. The water made its own mirror and then forgot it. I ate standing up because some days deserve the decency of not making a ceremony out of hunger. Lila did not call again. She tried other doors. A friend of hers, one, with a mouth that believes itself charming, left me a voicemail explaining that misunderstandings can cause brand damage and that surely as a mother I would not want that for my daughter. She suggested in a tone that promised a future favor nobody needs that I authorize a bridge just for the optics. I deleted the message while her voice was still spelling optics, as if it had an extra vowel the rest of us had been denied. By 2, the rain had taken its apology and gone. Heat reclaimed the block in degrees. The mockingbird returned to the idea of music and succeeded. I put the study in order again as if order were contagious. On the street, a landscape crew worried a hedge into compliance. The cutter's buzzing dulled the afternoon until the house raised its eyebrows and the sound stepped back. I sat at the desk without turning on the lamp. The light stood on its own legs. The first post arrived the way these things do. Confident punctuation, the kind of photograph that pretends it's about a salad but aims its lens at a wristwatch. Lila had written 3 sentences to a world she believes waits for her voice. Has anyone else dealt with their parent cutting them off in a way that's unsafe and frankly unhinged? I'm just trying to buy groceries and support my household while certain people play power games. Honestly, it's giving betrayal. A few hearts tapped the glass with the reflex of metronomes. A friend wrote, "We got you," and added a rose emoji I didn't try to decode. Someone else posted a story with the angle of a checkout lane and the caption, "Yikes." The faces in the blurred background were more honest than any caption would ever dare be. I put the phone away again. I could feel the impulse the way weather makes itself known in a knee, say something set. Something straight, answer the part of the room that has been trained to believe the first version that arrives in a handsome coat. Instead, I watered basil. The plant did not argue. Leaves darkened. Soil took its sip and became more itself. You cannot rush how a thing drinks. At 3:18 the doorbell rang, one short, too long, as if the button had private feelings. I opened the door to find a woman in a navy polo the color of decisions and a man in khaki with a clipboard. The polo reads Savannah Leasing and Finance. The clipboard, of course, read nothing. Clipboards never confess. "Afternoon, ma'am," the woman said. "Apologies for the intrusion. We're here to verify equipment locations associated with a vehicle lease. Is Ms. Caldwell Mercer present?" "No," I said, which was both answer and policy. "We have a contact number that—" "You'll want to try that," I said. She nodded, grateful to be told to do the thing she was already doing. "Mind if we leave a card?" "Mine, no." I took it. The card was heavy in that way good paper has of making bad news feel expensive. They returned to the sidewalk where a tow truck idled with its orange light asleep. A neighbor's curtain breathed in. The afternoon went on making its proofs. I closed the door without making a ceremony out of it. Inside, the air held a faint metallic taste, the kind that floats up when a storm has decided not to be finished after all. I checked a window latch with a finger and found it honest. I checked nothing else. By late day, the posts that wanted attention had found it and were learning the limits of their appetite. A woman I used to see at a fundraiser where chicken salad tried to pass as an event wrote a comment long enough to count as a letter to the editor. It included the word toxic twice and the phrase setting boundaries without humor. Someone else replied with a screenshot of a county record that knows who owns what, despite anybody's captions. The internet believes itself a courtroom on weekdays and a parade on weekends. It had chosen to march. I sliced an onion for supper and welcomed the blunt mercy of a knife that tells the truth. Eyes watered because onions do their work, not because the day had asked for moisture. I measured rice the way you measure what you can keep level and enough. The stove took fire and behaved. When the phone finally rang again, the light outside had tilted into that true slow gold that Savannah keeps hidden behind every hour like a trick coin. The number belonged to Southern First. "Mrs. Caldwell, Marcus," said the voice, steady in the way of men who sit in chairs meant to be sat in. "Following up. The directive has processed across all linked products. You'll see that in your portal. A formal letter will follow. We've also flagged any attempts to reinstate third-party access without your approval." "Thank you," I said. There is a kind of courtesy that declines elaboration. He practiced it. "All right then," he said, which in this part of the world means more than most people manage with paragraphs. "Marcus," I added before he could hang up, "you were clear." "I try to be." The line clicked to neutral. The kitchen resumed. Outside, the first cricket rehearsed for a darkness not yet earned. I plated what I had cooked, ate at the table without dressing it for company, and washed my plate with the small, endless confidence of soap. The towel did its job and kept its lint to itself. At 6:02, the group chat screenshot reached me by another route. A cousin captioned it with a mercy, "Don't look if you don't want to." I respected the wisdom and didn't. The house held its temperature as the day tried on evening. A long-haul horn sounded from the direction of the river, that low iron animal that vibrates your chest wall the way a bass note can. Somewhere out toward the port, cranes put their heads down like tired birds. Work ended where it always does, at the place where hands stop moving and decide to be hands again. I stepped onto the porch with tea and a wedge of lemon that contributed a bright idea to the glass. On the sidewalk, a couple walked a dog that appears to have opinions about bark timing. We exchanged the nod that says everything is as it is. Cicadas reached an accord with themselves and began. The oak performed shade despite the hour. The porch swing was more honest than memory and creaked at exactly the place it always creaks. Light left the world in stages a patient man could inventory if he were so inclined. The first windows across the street took electricity into themselves and wore it without guilt. A lone bicycle cut a shy line through the damp on the pavement. I sat until the tea made its own weather in me, and the lemon gave up pretending to be sharp. When I went back in the study, received me like a room that tolerates your comings and goings because it understands return. The drawer closed with manners. The envelope obeyed gravity. The tin waited on the shelf and asked for nothing. The air held that faint, end-of-day sweetness old houses make from floorboards and paint and the ordinary ambition of dust. The night discarded its second thoughts and took its place on the map. The fan kept its hymn. I turned off what was lit left, what knew how to glow on its own, and let the house do its breathing while the city ran the last of its errands around us, and forgot to be loud. In the dark somewhere, a screen brightened for someone who believes brightness is proof. In the quiet somewhere, a clerk finished a report that will live in a folder, that will live in a drawer, that will outlive any caption. In this room, paper rested where paper rests. Keys stayed where keys stay. I lay down. The mattress recognized me without enthusiasm or complaint. Out past the oak, a sliver of cloud rehearsed moonlight and failed, then tried again. I closed my eyes and found the river at the place it makes its slow turn not to change its mind, just to keep going as itself. Morning arranged itself without consultation. Kettle blinds the small lilt of a radio ad that mispronounced a street I've known all my life. The porch board still remembered last night's humidity. The towel in the kitchen did that clean sun cotton thing it does when weather behaves. I moved through the house quiet as if language might bruise. The mail came earlier than usual and heavier. 3 envelopes wore the kind of paper that carries weight like a shoulder cream toothy. Names embossed so modestly they almost apologized for themselves. Hathaway, Cobb and Rowe, Jasper and Lane, LLP, Beaufort, Savannah, title and abstract. The postal ink was still damp enough to ghost my fingers. I set them on the dining table where the light makes everything earnest. Paper opens easiest when you don't hurry it. Inside the first, a cover letter measured to the inch, followed by a packet itemizing what the world does when signatures and seals agree. Transfer of beneficial interest from one entity to another. Revocation of authorized occupants. Notice of account consolidation with effective dates that already belong to the past. Each paragraph wore a number like a school badge. There's a comfort in numeration it implies an order existed before your need for it did. The second envelope held copies stamped, filed in a red that looked like it had made peace with its own theatrics. Quit claim deed. Cypress Reach, track 345. Correction of record address for a Baldwin Park home. UCC financing statement termination on an item I once signed to make a banker's eyebrows relax. I ran a finger along one raised seal. The heat of my hand woke the paper's tooth, and the page answered with the faintest rasp, not gratitude, just acknowledgement. The last envelope was thin but decisive. Lease termination demand for a Range Rover. Velar plate numbers precise van in like a hymn with no melody. The clause that mattered arrived without adjectives. Lacey of record Ruth Caldwell. Immediate surrender required upon notice. I signed the bottom line where a space waited for proof. A human being had read and slipped the document back into its sleeve. On the sideboard, the tin with the scallop observed. I put the envelopes beside it, the room balanced. By 10 a truck, I recognized by sound, alone turned into a complex on skidaway orange light, yawning itself awake. A neighbor texted a picture of a driveway over on Baldwin Park, where a hood once posed as a promise and now angled up like a mouth, asking a question it didn't want the answer to. The caption said nothing. It didn't need to. The truck, polite in its way, waited while paperwork shook hands with protocol. 2 minutes later, the vehicle was on the flatbed angles corrected by chains that sang under strain. Front curtains twitched along the block as if a breeze had organized them. I made tea and carried it to the porch. Forsyth Park kept its distance and let shade talk for it. A jogger's shoes made their appointed argument with the sidewalk. A boy rode a bike he had outgrown by an inch and solved the math with will. The sky offered blue the way a host offers more pie. The first long post landed on Facebook around then, written in the tone of a person explaining a crisis to a mirror that won't take sides. When your own mother weaponizes finances to humiliate you, where do you turn? Beneath it, a selfie taken on a porch that does not belong to me, chin high, wrist bare. The comments assembled, ping. This is abuse. DM me. A woman I remember from a charity luncheon typed, boundaries are a two-way street with the confidence of someone who has never stood in a checkout lane and felt a machine prefer the truth. Screenshots of county records began orbiting tidy PDFs with names that refused to lie. A cousin who likes neatness in all things texted a single line, public info speaks. I didn't answer. The basil needed water. Around noon, the doorbell rang, just once, like a question that knew its answer and showed up anyway. A courier in short sleeves clipboard elevated to the status of fact offered a padded envelope and a signature line. Inside, a smaller envelope with the exacting gravity of a church program. Notice of revocation, property access, and occupancy. 30 days to vacate an upstairs suite over on Baldwin Park that had hosted Lila's collection of shoes that admired each other. Keys to be returned to an office that always smelled faintly of upholstery cleaner and citrus. I signed the receipt, thanked the courier by name because it was embroidered there, and because names deserve air, and closed the door. The house accepted the new paper with the rest. It knows where to shelve the world. News travels by foot in this city, even when it believes itself digital. On the sidewalk, two women debated whether a person can be cut off from what they never owned. A man with a good hat tipped it to nobody in particular and kept walking. At the corner, a dog interrupted its own bark because flies are more compelling in summer. The day refused melodrama and got on with being hot. I took myself to Forsyth without announcing it. Live Oaks offered their operating instructions, art, shade, and Doreen. A wedding party posed under the fountain with the bravery of people who believe tuxedos thrive in August. A saxophone practiced scales near the monument, each note testing the air for weak places. I sat on a bench that remembered 100 conversations and left mine out of courtesy. On the way home, humidity made its case and won. A small storm rolled its shoulders over the river and reconsidered. Back on the porch, I found a heavy envelope tucked into the rail like a secret that refused to whisper. Southern First Private, again, this time with confirmations of action in duplicate secondary users removed, signed by a compliance officer whose handwriting was the visual equivalent of a straight-backed chair. Card closure certificates with dates exact enough to satisfy an archivist. Account renaming to align with a structure decided a decade ago when my pen still clicked like an apology. I filed the duplicates with their twins. Systems like pairs. Lila's social world exhausted itself toward evening. Her insistence hardened briefly into lecture threads about toxic parents, about economic violence, about cycles that sounded like a catalog of modern nouns, and then softened into quiet when an aunt posted a photo from 2003 of Lila in rubber boots, freckled and grinning, over a bucket of oysters at Tybee, the caption, "We used to eat what the river gave." The comments went thin after that. Memory can be a better moderator than settings. At 5:12, my phone displayed a voicemail transcription from a number I recognized as the one Lila uses when she wants strangers to answer. This is Renee with Jasper and Lane representing Ms. Caldwell Mercer. We request immediate discussion regarding continuing access to assets Ms. Caldwell Mercer reasonably expected to rely upon. Please return our call. The script did its polite work. Expectations can be tall. Contracts are taller. I let the voicemail sit. 30 minutes later, Renee called again and left the same language in a voice that knew how to be fine on a bad day. The lease agent's email arrived just after 6, vehicle surrendered per Clause 9, Condition photographed, copy attached. I clicked one image, a hood reflecting sky chains neat as braids. I closed it before the picture could be anything but a record. Dusk calibrated the house to its evening settings. Lamps woke not all, just the ones that knew their jobs. The porch gathered cricket song. That low iron note from the port traveled its steady arc through the heart of town and went on as if rails were sentences no one had ever learned to punctuate. The tin with the scallop held still. Paper kept its places. The kitchen welcomed the sound of a knife finding onion and the close comfort of water running warm because a person had turned the handle and expected the world to keep its small promises. Past dark, my phone glowed onto the ceiling, faint and square, while I stood at the window and let the neighborhood pass through its necessary motions. Headlights gliding a late jogger's vest, catching light like minnows, a porch conversation lowering itself with the night. Far-off thunder tried a second opinion and lost interest. The air cooled by degrees. On the table the stack of letters waited without urgency. One had slid a half-inch from the group, not dramatic, just honest about gravity. I moved it back into line and rested a palm on the topmost page, the weight of words and paper answering the weight of my hand, in an exchange as old as any this house knows. Nothing in the room hurried. Nothing asked the future to behave. The fan turned, the envelopes breathed, the night held. Morning came without ceremony and did its small arithmetic light, through blinds the friendly clink of pipes remembering how to behave a stovetop that needed the briefest persuasion before flame agreed. I rinsed a cup, turned it in my hands until the crack I can't see found my thumb and filled it anyway. The house exhaled from the night's paper and decisions, then stood up straight. By noon, the rooms had emptied themselves into boxes the size of reasonable choices. A friend from church, quiet woman good at corners, helped me fold linens into a logic that would make sense on the other side. We labeled in pen that will outlive both of us, kitchen books, lamp cords, winter. When the truck arrived, a modest one with paint that told the truth, the porch made space for men who carry weight for a living without narrating it. The dining table left with the same courtesy it had used to host arguments and cobblers. Chairs followed, each with an opinion on which stair creaked most. The house, relieved of bulk, sounded larger, as if it had been holding its breath politely for years, and finally took a bigger one. The apartment that took me in sits above the river with the blunt honesty of a place designed to be useful. The elevator minded its manners. The hallway smelled faintly of fresh paint and a neighbor's lemon cleaner. Inside, white walls waiting their turn, a balcony slim as a promise, windows that knew how to hold light without keeping it hostage. The movers brought in the small life I had allowed myself. Bed, 2 chairs that had earned their keep, a table the color of old bread, the tin with the scallop wrapped in dish towels like a secret that was tired of pretending. By evening, the boxes were stacked in obedient columns, and the kitchen had learned my cup, my spoon, the way I like the towels folded. I went out onto the balcony and put 3 terracotta pots where they could see the river, basil, rosemary, thyme. The soil released a smell like a pocket of summer kept for emergencies. Down below, a barge slid east with the patient arrogance of something that has never once been hurried by a clock. A gull tried and failed to explain itself to the wind. The light took its time leaving. The first night in any place asks what you've brought besides things. I lay in bed and counted the new sounds until they decided to be mine. A neighbor's late laugh traveling a short hallway and losing interest, a pipe making a small apology for its own existence, the river's low iron hum registering in the sternum more than the ear. The mattress didn't know me yet, but it tried. I slept like a person who had finished a long list without promising anyone that she would. Days passed in a quiet with edges. I walked to the market 2 blocks over, the one where peaches claps with dignity and fish stare back without judgment. A boy bagged my greens as if they were delicate instruments. I thanked him by name because it was on his tag and because names ought to be used. I chose second-hand pieces from shops that keep other people's stories in stock. A blue sofa with a patient dip at one end, a lamp whose switch clicks like a good metronome, a small cabinet with a drawer that sticks just enough to make you notice. Work arrived the way a familiar letter finds the right mailbox. An owner of a logistics startup down by the port asked if I could spend 2 afternoons a week talking through contracts and the parts of money that make people squint. His office had fluorescent lights with better manners than most, and a window that let cranes practice their slow, devout bows. I sat at a table that had been scratched by earnestness and read with the same attention I used to give incubators, eyes steady, breath ordinary. He paid promptly and in the precise amount agreed upon. Gratitude has a texture when it's honest. The room had it. At home, I arranged the shelves one decision at a time. Books that know how to be read twice to the left, the rest by height because vanity serves a purpose. On the highest shelf, the tin with the scallop waited where the evening light couldn't brag on it. I took it down after supper, set it on the table, and listened to the river working at the edge of its patience. The lid opened with the small sigh of a thing that has learned discretion. Inside lay the 2 halves of the card, now dulled from touch edges, still competent. Beside them, the mother-of-pearl button that matches nothing. I added a shell I'd kept in a drawer since Lila was 8, Tybee June a day when she'd handed it to me, with both palms as if it had been music and not calcium and time. The 3 lived together like they had agreed in advance. I do not write much down. Some truths prefer the air, but I keep a narrow journal for the days that require ink. At the table I opened it to a clean page, the paper not quite white, the lines pale enough to be suggestions. I dated the corner and wrote in the square hand nurses cultivate when machines are watching power doesn't have to echo. It just has to stand. The sentence looked back without flinching. I closed the book gently so it would remember itself. In the weeks that gathered, the apartment learned me the way a body learns a route, where to place the kettle on the burner which bored near the balcony, asks for mercy when the afternoon makes a square of sun on the floor that means it's time to put your feet in it. I met a neighbor who wears slippers to check the mail, a widower who feeds bread to the gulls, despite signs that discourage both. We exchanged the sort of conversation that respects privacy and still feels like company. I learned the sound of rain on this roof, less performance, more confession. From time to time, my phone considered the wider world and declined it. A headline, a message drafted, then left unsent on purpose. The river kept its timetable, ignoring ours. I worked my hours and walked home under oaks that had gone dark against a sky rehearsing silver. Supper was simple and deserved. The plants leaned toward whatever light they were given and didn't make a speech about it. One afternoon, a box arrived from the old house forwarded by the friend with the good corners. Inside, wrapped in newsprint that remembered last month's weather, sat a cedar box I hadn't expected to see again. I held it for the weight memory gives wood and then set it on the shelf lower than the tin, not out of demotion, just out of accuracy. Things find their level if you let them. That evening, I carried a chair onto the balcony and sat with my knees covered by a blanket that had forgotten the smell of its former bedroom. Boats negotiated, gulls auditioned. The basil let itself be bruised between finger and thumb and answered with a green that means more than a color. Across the water, warehouse lights blinked in a rhythm that didn't ask to be admired. The wind brought the low grammar of the port. Behind me, the room kept its order lamp chair, cabinet the square of uncarpeted floor that holds the day's shoes until morning. I stayed until the air cooled from statement to understatement and the river lost its mirror and decided to be depth again. I went inside, set the chair back where it belongs, turned off what needed turning off, and left the window cracked the width of 2 fingers so the room could hear what the water tells the night when nobody is listening for it. The door caught at its frame and then agreed. The tin kept its counsel. The sentence in the journal dried without drama. The apartment held its quiet like a job it wanted and had earned. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.